In a world where the laughter and innocence of childhood should be sacrosanct, the story of Sera Sherif sends shivers down the spine. At the tender age of 10, Sera's bright, promising life was extinguished in a moment of unimaginable betrayal. She wasn't harmed by a stranger or a faceless danger lurking outside. No, her life was stolen by the one person who should have been her strongest protector, her own father. The details of Sera's short life, marked by abuse and ultimately culminating in her tragic death, unravel a horrifying narrative that forces us to question the systems meant to protect our most vulnerable. How could such darkness fester unnoticed? How did a child's cries for help go unheard? And most importantly, what must change to ensure no other child suffers the same fate? This is more than a story of a family's tragedy. It is a call to action, a plea for awareness, and a stark reminder of the monsters that sometimes hide in plain sight. As we peel back the layers of this harrowing case, we confront not only the pain of one innocent life lost, but also the collective failure that allowed it to happen. This is the story of Sera Sherif, and it's one you won't soon forget. Before we dive into the video, welcome to True Crime Talks, where we uncover chilling true crime stories, dissect complex cases, and illuminate the unanswered questions that keep us up at night. From shocking crimes that shook the world to little-known stories that demand justice, we leave no stone unturned. Join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts by hitting that subscribe button below. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. On August 10th, 2023, the lifeless body of Sera Sherif was discovered in her home in Woking, Surrey, sending shockwaves through the community and igniting a nationwide conversation about child protection. The circumstances surrounding her death were not only heartbreaking, but also horrifying. Sera had suffered unimaginable abuse at the hands of her father, Irfan Sherif, and his accomplices. The revelations that followed painted a picture of a young girl trapped in a cycle of violence and neglect, one that ultimately led to her untimely demise. Sera Sherif was born on January 11, 2013 in Slough, Berkshire, to Irfan Sherif and Olga Daman. Irfan, a Pakistani immigrant who arrived in the UK in 2001, worked as a taxi driver. Olga, originally from Poland, faced significant challenges due to her learning difficulties and limited English proficiency. Their marriage in 2009 was marred by early signs of domestic violence, with Irfan arrested for assaulting Olga shortly after their union. Reports indicated that he exhibited controlling behavior, including instances where he allegedly attempted to strangle her and even set her on fire. These incidents foreshadowed a troubling family dynamic that would later envelop Sera. The couple had 2 children, Sara and a son born in 2010. However, their relationship deteriorated rapidly. By 2015, after years of conflict and accusations of abuse from both sides, they separated and eventually divorced. Following the divorce, custody of Sara and her brother was awarded to Irfan in 2019, despite Olga's objections regarding their upbringing as Muslims. This decision marked a significant turning point in Sara's life, as she was now under the sole care of a father with a documented history of violence. Sara's stepmother, Beinash Batul, entered the family dynamic after Irfan remarried. The couple had 4 additional children together. Reports indicate that Beinash played an active role in the household. However, her relationship with Sara was far from nurturing. Instead of providing a safe environment for Sara, Beinash became complicit in the abusive atmosphere that permeated their home. Sara's uncle, Faisal Malik, also lived with them during this time. The presence of multiple adults in the household did not translate into increased safety for Sara. Rather, it created an environment where abuse could flourish unchecked. The family dynamics were further complicated by cultural expectations and pressures within their Pakistani heritage. Irfan's strict adherence to traditional values may have influenced his views on discipline and punishment, leading him to justify abusive behavior as a form of legal punishment. This mindset contributed to an environment where Sera's suffering went unnoticed by those outside the family unit. Despite the troubling dynamics at home, there were moments when Sera sought help from school authorities. She often presented conflicting stories about her injuries to teachers and peers, hinting at the chaotic environment she endured daily. Her attempts to communicate her pain were met with skepticism or indifference from adults who failed to recognize the severity of her situation. Sera lived in a household marked by neglect and abuse. The family resided in Woking, Surrey, a suburban area that should have provided a safe environment for children. However, within the confines of their home, Sera experienced a starkly different reality, characterized by physical violence and emotional turmoil. Reports from neighbors painted a disturbing picture of life in the Sherif household. One neighbor recounted hearing constant crying and screaming coming from the home, a chilling indication of the distress that permeated their living conditions. On one occasion, when a neighbor expressed concern for Sera's well-being, Beinash reportedly shut the door in her face, dismissing any inquiries about their family's situation. Sera's injuries were numerous and severe. She bore signs of prolonged abuse that included fractures, burns, bruising, and other traumatic injuries. These physical manifestations of violence were often hidden beneath clothing or explained away by fabricated stories crafted by Irfan or Beinash to deflect scrutiny from outsiders. The environment at home was not just physically dangerous, but emotionally toxic as well. The constant fear of punishment likely left Sera feeling isolated and helpless, a child trapped in an abusive cycle with no apparent means of escape. School authorities became increasingly concerned about her well-being as conflicting accounts about her injuries raised red flags. The tragic case of Sera Sherif unfolded over several months, culminating in her discovery on August 10, 2023. In April 2023, Irfan Sherif made a critical decision that would significantly alter the trajectory of his daughter Sera's life. He informed her school that she would no longer attend and instead be homeschooled. This abrupt change raised concerns among school officials, as it severed Sera from her educational and social support networks, isolating her from the outside world. On April 6, 2023, the Sherif family relocated to a modest 3-bedroom house on Hammond Road in the Horsell area of Woking, Surrey. While the move might have appeared routine, it marked the beginning of a sinister chain of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. By August 8, 2023, ominous signs of Sera's distress began to surface. That evening, around 8:38 p.m., a child sent an urgent WhatsApp message to a school friend stating that Sera had just passed away. The chilling message hinted at a crisis within the Sherif household. Later that same evening, at approximately 9:07 p.m., Beinash Batul, Sera's stepmother, contacted Southall Travel Agency to inquire about flights to Pakistan. Despite a prolonged 50-minute conversation, no bookings were made. However, this call revealed a sense of urgency and a potential plan to flee the country. By 10 p.m., Irfan Sherif took another step toward departure. He contacted Nadeem Riaz, an employee of a money transfer business, requesting assistance in booking a flight to Pakistan for the following day. This heightened the suspicion that the family was attempting to evade scrutiny shortly after Sera's untimely death. The following morning, surveillance footage showed a family leaving their home and heading to an airport, presumably for an international flight later in the day. Their departure, coming soon after a tragic event, raised suspicions about their potential involvement. In the early hours of the following day, the father, now in a different country, made a phone call to authorities.
Take a deep breath and tell me what's happened.
I cannot. I physically punished my daughter and she died.
Your daughter has died?
I killed my daughter.
How have you killed your daughter?
I beat her up. It wasn't my intention to kill her, but I beat her up too much.
In this call, he admitted to causing harm to his child, claiming that he had punished her severely, although he stated that her death was not his intention. Despite this, he confessed to administering excessive punishment, describing his child's behavior as troublesome. This shocking admission prompted a swift law enforcement response. Later that same day, officers arrived at the family home to investigate further. What they found was a scene that would forever haunt them: a lifeless child in an area of the home with visible signs of prolonged suffering. The injuries discovered on the body were numerous, including fractures, burns, and other signs of significant physical abuse. These injuries, when examined post-mortem, were found to be the result of repeated violence, over a period of time. In addition to physical wounds, there were indications of restraint and possible bite marks. A note was also found, allegedly written by the father, offering a glimpse into the mindset of those involved. A post-mortem investigation uncovered extensive evidence of physical trauma, including signs of repeated force and burns, further confirming the abuse endured by the child in the weeks leading up to her death. Weeks later, the parents appeared on a news broadcast.
Firstly, I would like to talk about Sara. Sara's death was an incident. Lastly, we are willing to cooperate with the UK authorities and fight our case in court.
In the video, they referred to the tragedy in a detached manner, calling it an incident, and showing no signs of remorse or accountability, which only deepened suspicions regarding their involvement. A few days later, authorities located the family members abroad, and they were returned to face charges related to the death. Upon their return, they were arrested and taken into custody. The series of events leading to the discovery of the child's death reveals a disturbing pattern of secrecy, urgency, and evasion, suggesting premeditation and a deliberate attempt to avoid justice. The father's actions appeared to stem from a combination of personal beliefs, cultural influences, and denial. In certain contexts, there is a strong expectation for parents to exercise strict discipline, sometimes blurring the line between correction and punishment. This mindset, when coupled with a lack of empathy and justification for severe actions, can lead to tragic outcomes. The violence inflicted on the young victim can be understood as part of a larger pattern of control and power dynamics. Abuse often stems from a desire to dominate and instill fear in those who are vulnerable. By targeting the child, the abuser may have sought to assert authority over someone perceived as defenseless, using violence to reinforce dominance within the family. Throughout the trial, the abuser demonstrated a tendency to deny the full extent of their actions. They often attempted to justify their treatment of the child, sometimes shifting blame onto others or claiming that their behavior was a form of discipline. These justifications appeared to be defense mechanisms designed to avoid confronting the moral and ethical implications of their actions. By reframing the abuse in this way, the abusers sought to minimize their responsibility and evade accountability. The victim's life was marked by a disturbing pattern of abuse that lasted for an extended period and ultimately led to her tragic death at a young age. The details of her suffering are deeply troubling and highlight systemic failures in protecting vulnerable individuals. The abuse was multifaceted, involving physical violence, emotional trauma, and neglect. The child was subjected to severe mistreatment at the hands of multiple family members. The extent of her injuries was staggering, reflecting the ongoing abuse she endured. A post-mortem examination revealed that the child had suffered from over 70 distinct injuries, which included fractures. The autopsy showed a series of fractures across multiple parts of the body, suggesting repeated harm over a significant period. The victim also suffered burn injuries, which left lasting marks on her skin. These injuries pointed to intentional harm, raising concerns about the abusive environment she was living in. Further investigation revealed signs of severe mistreatment, including bite marks on the child's body. This finding underscores the importance of recognizing all forms of abuse in order to prevent further harm. Additional evidence suggested that the child endured emotional and psychological torment beyond the physical violence. The use of certain objects and methods indicated the severity of her suffering. In addition to the physical abuse, the child also faced neglect, with her injuries left untreated. This highlights the gaps in systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals and the need for stronger interventions in cases of suspected abuse. In the days leading up to her tragic end, the child's health deteriorated significantly. Neighbors reported hearing distressing sounds from the home, such as cries for help, indicating the extent of her suffering. By this point, the child had become more isolated and withdrawn, clearly indicating the toll the abuse had taken on her physical and emotional well-being. The psychological aspects of Sara's abuse are equally troubling. The environment in which she lived was one characterized by fear, manipulation, and control. Sera Sherif employed various tactics to maintain dominance over Sara and suppress any attempts she made to seek help or express her pain. Sara's withdrawal from school under the guise of homeschooling marked the beginning of her physical and social isolation. By severing her connection to teachers, peers, and other external support systems, Sera effectively eliminated any potential avenues for intervention. This isolation created an environment where the abuse could escalate unchecked, shielding it from detection and making making it nearly impossible for Sera to seek help. Sera's caregivers utilized psychological manipulation to exert control over her. By instilling fear through threats and punitive actions, they created an atmosphere of constant intimidation. This manipulation silenced Sera, ensuring she felt powerless to challenge their authority or disclose her suffering to others. Despite her aspirations and youthful dreams, Sera was deprived of the emotional nurturing every child deserves. Her desire to achieve something as simple and joyful as appearing on television was overshadowed by the relentless cruelty she endured. To manage the daily trauma she faced, Sera developed coping mechanisms, such as using clothing like hijabs to conceal her injuries. This act not only reflected the depth of her suffering, but also revealed the normalization of abuse within her household. It underscored the lengths to which she went to adapt to her circumstances, further highlighting the urgency of recognizing and addressing such situations. The psychological toll on Sera was profound. Reports indicate that she often appeared withdrawn and rarely smiled, a stark contrast to the bubbly personality described by those who knew her before the onset of abuse. Her attempts at seeking help were met with skepticism or indifference from adults around her, further reinforcing feelings of helplessness. Following the discovery of Sera's body on August 10, 2023, authorities quickly identified Irfan Sharif, Beinash Batul, and Faisal Malik as key suspects in her murder. On September 14, 2023, all three were formally charged with murder and an additional charge of causing or allowing the death of a child. The gravity of these charges stemmed from the extensive abuse Sera endured leading up to her death, which was characterized by over 70 injuries, including fractures, burns, and signs of torture. The trio was remanded in custody and appeared before Guildford Magistrates Court on September 15th. They later appeared via video link at London's Old Bailey on September 19th. During these initial hearings, it became evident that the prosecution was building a strong case based on both physical evidence and confessions made by Irfan Sharif. The trial began on October 8, 2024, at the Old Bailey, unveiling a heartbreaking and chilling narrative of the abuse Sera endured. Over the course of the proceedings, harrowing testimonies and evidence painted a detailed picture of her tragic life, emphasizing the campaign of abuse inflicted by those who were meant to protect her. One of the key moments in the trial was the revelation of Irfan's confession, made after fleeing to Pakistan. In his statement to the police, he admitted to killing Sara, but insisted it was unintentional, framing his actions as legal punishment. This confession proved crucial in establishing his culpability, despite his later attempts to downplay or shift responsibility. Prosecutors presented gruesome evidence collected from the family home, including a blood-stained cricket bat and a rolling pin containing Sera's DNA. Medical experts testified about her injuries, describing them as consistent with prolonged abuse and neglect. Among the most damning findings was the pediatric radiologist's testimony, which suggested that some injuries pointed to manual strangulation. Witness testimonies further exposed the horror Sera experienced. Neighbors recounted hearing cries for help from the Sharif home, a haunting reminder of the torment she faced behind closed doors. School officials shared observations of bruises on Sera's body before she was withdrawn under the pretext of homeschooling, cutting her off from any potential support systems. The trial also saw dramatic developments during Irfan's cross-examination. He initially tried to shift blame onto Beinash, alleging that she had fabricated parts of his confession. However, he later retracted this claim, ultimately taking full responsibility for Sera's death. In a moment of rare candor, he described himself as the worst parent on the planet and acknowledged the cruelty he had inflicted upon his daughter. The proceedings highlighted not only the physical violence Sera endured, but also the emotional neglect and psychological manipulation that defined her life. The prosecution argued that Irfan and Beinash demonstrated sadistic tendencies in their treatment of Sara, leaving no aspect of her short life untouched by their abuse. Through the testimony and evidence, the court was presented with an unflinching account of a child's unimaginable suffering, calling attention attention to the systemic failures that allowed it to continue unchecked. On December 11, 2024, after weeks of deliberation, the jury returned their verdicts. Irfan Sherif was found guilty of murder. Beinash Batul was also found guilty of murder, while Faisal Malik was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. The sentencing phase followed shortly after. On December 17, 2024, Judge Mr. Justice Kavanaugh delivered a powerful statement regarding the severity of their crimes. He described Sera's suffering as a campaign of torture that involved almost inconceivable cruelty. The sentences were as follows.
Irfan Sherif, for the murder of Sera Sherif, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking account of all the relevant circumstances and the aggravating mitigating factors that I have set out, the minimum term will be 40 years. Beinash Batul, for the murder of Sera Sherif, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking account of all the relevant circumstances and the aggravating and mitigating factors that I have set out, the minimum term will be 33 years. For the offence of causing or allowing the death of Sera Sherif, I sentence you to imprisonment for 16 years.
Irfan Sherif, sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years. Beinash Batul, sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 33 years. Faisal Malik, sentenced to 16 years in prison for his role in allowing Sera's death without intervening to stop the abuse. The courtroom erupted in cheers from members of the public gallery as the sentences were announced, reflecting widespread outrage over the horrific details revealed during the trial. In delivering these sentences, Judge Kavanaugh emphasized that both Irfan and Beinash had failed in their fundamental duty to protect their child. He noted that their actions were not only criminal, but also deeply immoral, an indictment not just against them, but against societal systems that allowed such abuse to persist unnoticed for so long. On January 1st, 2025, Irfan Sherif, the father convicted of murdering his daughter Sera Sherif, was attacked in HMP Belmarsh, a high-security prison in London. The incident occurred early on New Year's Day when Sherif was reportedly ambushed by two inmates, armed with a jagged lid from a tuna can. This brutal attack left him with significant injuries, including cuts to his neck and face. According to reports, the assault was premeditated. Sources indicated that the attackers had planned the ambush, taking advantage of a moment when Sherif was vulnerable in his cell. The makeshift weapon used in the attack, a sharp lid from a tuna tin, was particularly alarming given its improvised nature and the intention behind its use. Witnesses described how Irfan was sliced up badly, sustaining injuries that required stitches, but were fortunately not life-threatening. Following the attack, prison officials confirmed that Sherif received medical treatment on site. He remained under healthcare observation within the prison due to the severity of his injuries. Although he did not require hospitalization, the cuts he sustained will likely leave permanent scars as a reminder of the violent encounter. A spokesperson for the prison service stated that police were investigating the incident but refrained from providing further details while the inquiry was ongoing. The Metropolitan Police also confirmed they were probing an allegation of assault against Sherif, emphasizing that his injuries were non-life-threatening. The investigation into the attack is crucial not only for determining accountability, but also for assessing security measures within HMP Belmarsh. Given Irfan's notoriety as a child killer, concerns have been raised about his safety and how prison authorities manage inmates convicted of particularly heinous crimes. Sources indicated that Sherif now has a target on his back due to his conviction and the high-profile nature of Sera's case. Prison officials are reportedly taking steps to ensure Sherif's safety following this incident. However, there are fears that further attacks could occur as word spreads among inmates about his identity and crime. Some reports suggest that he may be placed in isolation to mitigate risks from other prisoners who may harbor animosity towards him because of his actions against a child. In the aftermath of the trial, Public sentiment has largely been one of anger and disbelief at both the actions of Sera's parents and the systemic failures that allowed such abuse to continue unchecked for so long. Many community members expressed their sorrow for Sera's suffering and frustration at institutions that failed to protect her despite numerous warning signs. The case has sparked discussions about child protection policies and prompted calls for reforms within social services. Critics have pointed fingers at various agencies involved in Sera's life, including schools and social services, accusing them of negligence for not intervening sooner, despite being aware of potential abuse. In response to public outcry, government officials have proposed new legislation aimed at improving child welfare systems. Measures include stricter regulations on homeschooling applications for at-risk children and enhanced tracking mechanisms for absent children. However, many advocates argue that these changes are merely superficial fixes to deeper societal issues related to domestic violence and child abuse. The case has also ignited conversations about misogyny and societal attitudes toward women and children. Observers noted that Sera was subjected to abuse largely because she was seen as less valuable than her male counterparts within her family structure. This perspective has led to calls for broader cultural changes alongside legislative reforms. Public campaigns advocating for children's rights have gained momentum as activists seek to ensure that no child suffers as Sera did. Many are pushing for increased funding for child protection services and better training for professionals who work with vulnerable families. Sera Sherif's tragic case serves as a poignant reminder of the urgent need for reform in child protection policies. Her suffering, which culminated in her untimely death at the hands of those who were supposed to care for her, underscores the catastrophic consequences of systemic failures within social services and family courts. Despite numerous warning signs and a documented history of violence, Sera was placed in an environment that allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. This oversight not only cost her life, but also raises critical questions about how we safeguard vulnerable children. The lessons learned from Sera's case must lead to actionable change. Policymakers must prioritize the safety and well-being of children above all else, ensuring that allegations of abuse are taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. This includes reevaluating the criteria used by family courts when determining custody arrangements, especially in cases involving domestic violence. The tragic outcomes experienced by Sera and other children like her highlight the need for a more robust framework that emphasizes accountability and proactive intervention. As we reflect on Sera's legacy, it is imperative that we engage with child welfare advocacy groups and support initiatives aimed at preventing similar tragedies. Organizations such as Karma Nirvana and the Muslim Women's Network UK are actively working to raise awareness about child protection issues and advocate for systemic reforms. By getting involved, whether through donations, volunteering, or simply spreading awareness, we can contribute to a movement that seeks to protect children from abuse and neglect. Let us honor Sera's memory by committing ourselves to ensuring that no child suffers as she did.